Hello, everyone. Welcome to this year's IDAHOTB event, the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. And the theme for this year's event is Together Always, United in Diversity. And this theme is a call to recognize sexual and gender diversity and celebrate our being together in this advocacy. We have an exciting program for you. The program for our virtual forum has two parts. So in part one, ADB will present an overview of its initiatives in promoting the inclusion of people with diverse sexual orientation, gender identities and expression, and sex characteristics. We are also fortunate to have a video with a motivational message from ADB's Managing Director General, Mr. Woo Chong-Om, on the occasion of this IDAHOTB 2023. And the second part, part two, is a sharing of the analysis of issues, trends, achievements, challenges in promoting this inclusion in the Asia Pacific. So as the executive sponsor for ADB's LGBT Plus and Friends group, I'm honored to take part in today's event and do my part as an ally and a champion for diversity, inclusion, and belonging in ADB. So we kick off today's event with a video message from Ms. Masako Mori, who's a special aide to the Prime Minister of Japan on women's empowerment and LGBTQ issues. And then we have our distinguished keynote speaker and important panelists. And our keynote speaker for today is Ms. Rosanna Flama Caldera. Ms. Caldera is a prominent LGBT rights activist and an advocate for the decriminalization of homosexual activity and the elimination of discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. She co-founded the Sri Lankan organization Women's Support Group to provide support for lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women. And in 2001, Rosanna became the first female Asian representative to the executive board of the ILGA. A very important recognition. And in 2005, she received the Utopia Award for LGBT rights activism, which is Asia's leading LGBT human rights award. So I'm sure all of you are looking forward to listening to her. But we also have a lineup in part two, and our part two motivational speaker is Ms. Gina Jones, the 27th Undersecretary of the Air Force of the United States. And in addition to her honorable military service, she was a Democratic nominee for Texas's 23rd Congressional District, the first gay woman of color and military veteran running for office in Texas. And during her tenure at the Air Force, she was responsible for some of the most significant diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts within the Defense Department. So as you can see, we have a very impressive lineup for you. As the executive sponsor for ADB's LGBT Plus and Friends group, I'm honored to open this day's event and do my part as an ally for our LGBT Plus community. Just a word about our LGBT Plus and Friends group. This group has brought voice to our LGBT colleagues and has worked to contribute to greater inclusion in our workplace. It's a visible sign of ADB's commitment to valuing the diversity of our people and building a culture where all are welcome. So let me thank all our speakers for gracing this forum with their presence, and thank all of you participants for your support. We are together always, united in diversity. Let me now hand over to Ms. Masako Mori for the opening message. Thank you.
本日はオンラインフォーラムへお招きをいただきありがとうございます。LGBT 理解増進を担当とする内閣総理大臣補佐官森雅子です。 本日のフォーラムでは、各国で LGBT の問題に関する議論が進展している中、各国の参加者の間で知見の共有や意見交換がなされるものと伺っております。本年は我が国が G7 議長国を務めます。G7 広島サミットを控え、こうした場を活用して LGBT に関する理解を深めていくことは大切なことであると考えています。我が国では職場や学校等をはじめとして社会での理解増進に向けた啓発活動の充実、適切な相談対応や人権救済等の取り組みを進められているところです。また、理解増進に関する議員立法の取り組みも進められているところです。引き続き多様性が尊重され、すべての人々がお互いの人権や尊厳を大切にし、生き生きとした人生を享受できる社会の実現に向け、さまざまな国民の声を受け止め、しっかりと取り組んでまいります。G7 サミットを控え、こうしたことを改めて国の内外に対して、丁寧に説明を続けていく努力を続けていくことが重要であると考えています。活発なご議論が交わされ、本日の会合が成功することをお祈りいたします。
Good morning, everybody. A very good day to all of you. I'm very, very honored and pleased to be the keynote speaker at this event today. I'm a little bit nervous as well. And of course, Francesco will say that I never get nervous, but I am a little bit. So today I'm going to basically share our journey at Equal Ground and myself in a journey towards addressing inequalities, discrimination, through engagement, litigation, and just media and communication blitzes, which have gone a very far way to get to where we are today in Sri Lanka. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a history of our advocacy in this country. We started Equal Ground in 2004, although my advocacy started in 1999 with the Women's Support Group and of course through my journey with ILGA in 2003 onwards. So our advocacy had three strategies. One was sensitizing and educating our own LGBTIQ persons, our own community, because at that time in 2004, when Equal Ground started, a lot of people were underground, a lot of people were afraid to be out, and they also didn't understand exactly who they were or what they were. So we decided that it was very, very important to teach them, to tell them it's okay to be who you are, be proud of who you are, and understand who you are. The same thing applied to the public at large, because we knew that no strides could be made in the legal side of things if the public of Sri Lanka, the people of Sri Lanka, are not behind and supportive of the LGBTIQ community. And of course, the third strategy was, legalizing same-sex relationships and decriminalizing the current criminal statutes that are still, at the moment, still on our law books. So with that in mind, we also felt that it was very important to engage with the treaty bodies at the UN. So since 2008, we have been contributing reports to most of the treaty bodies like ICESR, UPR, CEDAW, CRC, and so on, ICCPR as well. So this kind of led me to realize, particularly since there was a huge judgment at ICCPR at the UN in 1994, I believe, Toonen versus Australia, where Nick Toonen and his partner Roderick Kroom basically reported to the UN that Australia still criminalized consenting adult same-sex relationships. Soon after, Rodney filed a suit in Tasmania, where he is from, to ask the government of Australia also to decriminalize, and very soon they did decriminalize. So litigation and treaty bodies are extremely important in our journey, which led me in 2014 to begin a discussion with my friends at Human Dignity Trust in the UK to file a case with CEDAW, the CEDAW committee, the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, because in my country, Sri Lanka, we cannot challenge our laws in a court of law. We cannot go to the Supreme Court. And this is because in 1978, we had a savings law clause added to our constitution, which means that any law that was enacted before 1978 could not be challenged in a court of law and had to be an act of legislature. So this has been a frustrating and very long journey for us to lobby to try and get to where we are now, which I will explain a little bit later as well. So the CEDAW case started in 2014. We filed it in 2018. And last year in 2022, there was finally a decision made by the committee, and that decision was to uphold the case stated that we needed to decriminalize same-sex loving women, as well as put in clauses to protect and safeguard women, especially lesbian, bisexual, transgender women in Sri Lanka. It was a happy occasion, of course, and a small victory on our road to decriminalization, but it also started the ball rolling on several other things as well. So while this case, the good news came in February of last year, in the same year, there was there were several meetings by the Sri Lankan government. As you know, Sri Lanka is going through a huge economic crisis. The people of this country have been suffering greatly for the last 3 years since COVID, as well as the economic crisis. So, we are, in dire need of international intervention in this area. I guess it was no surprise then that there was a private member's bill that was put in, I believe, November of 2021. I take that back, in 2022, to say that they wanted to amend the penal code 365 and 365A and to decriminalize same-sex relationships. It was actually very welcome to hear that. And it is also very welcome to hear that the the president of our country basically supported the bill and made an announcement that there would be no challenges to that as far as the government was concerned. So we're very happy about that. As it stated, the CEDAW case that I put in was the provisions of that was that it had to exhaust all local remedies. And since we didn't have any local remedies, and the savings law clause in 78 basically prevented us from challenging. So this private members bill was one way of challenging this law and trying to get decriminalization through. So several things also happened last year. One was that the case that we filed against the police, for example, in November of 2021, this was because they employed a motivational speaker who basically stated that the reason why there's so much sexual abuse of children in Sri Lanka was because of the LGBTIQ community. She exhorted police to say that they wouldn't want their children to become gay or lesbian or transgender because there is an issue with that. So I've been told that I have only 1 minute, so I'm going to go, along really fast. The petition to decriminalize actually was gazetted and put to Parliament for the first reading. Whereafter there was a petition against it at the Supreme Court, saying that it was impinging on these persons' rights and constitutional rights to basically follow their religions, which prohibited LGBTIQ persons. So there was actually several intervening petitions that were filed as well against that petition, and the Supreme Court ruled last week that the petition had no merit, that it did not provide any kind of constitutional guarantee to those persons, and that it was fully within the LGBTIQ community's right to have these laws decriminalized. So this was a huge win for us, and we're so happy that the Supreme Court finally decided in our favor. But we still have a long road. We still have the government of Sri Lanka that needs to vote on this case and make it a reality for all of us in Sri Lanka. So fingers crossed that we have a good decision very soon. And with that, I think my time is up. Thank you so much again for having me on this. Good luck to all of you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Woo Chong-am, Managing Director General of the Asian Development Bank. We joined the international development community in commemorating the 2023 International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, or IDAHOTB. ADB is fully committed to promoting inclusion and diversity within its workforce and operations. How does ADB do this? Firstly, by promoting a more inclusive and diverse workforce where all employees feel valued and respected regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. This commitment is central to our ongoing diversity, inclusion, and belonging efforts reinforced by our ADB values. Secondly, by supporting inclusion and diversity in ADB's development projects in collaboration with governments, civil society, and the private sector. ADB is increasing the engagement of our operational departments to support government's commitment to non-discrimination in sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics, or SOGIESC inclusion. SOGIESC related policy dialogues are increasing, and we are working to help convert the discussions into actions and impacts. Thirdly, by further strengthening ADB's involvement in data collection and knowledge development. In collaboration with the World Bank, ADB is supporting a study on the legal barriers to SOGIESC inclusion in 17 countries. The study will be used as a reference to engage with our developing countries for greater SOGIESC inclusion in ADB finance projects. The opportunity to complement this study with a range of studies on the economic cost of discrimination is being explored with the Economics Research and Regional Cooperation Department. And finally, in line with the theme of this year's IDAHOTB, ADB recognizes the importance of the principles of inclusivity, diversity, and equality for all. This is in line with the Strategy 2030 objectives.
My name is Susanna D. Peterson, and I'm the Director of the Culture and Talents Division in BPMSD. An inclusive workplace is a better workplace. The research is definitive on this. As part of the ADB efforts to foster a diverse, inclusive, and safe workplace, we are committed to bring awareness to issues that impact those who identify as LGBT+ in our workplace and community. We have acted through policies, culture change efforts, and our engagements with the ADB group LGBT+ and friends. This is to ensure a welcoming and affirmative workplace where staff can bring the whole selves to work, regardless of their sexual orientation, sexual identity, gender expression, or sexual characteristics. Our partnership, the largest diversity and inclusion workplace organization in the Philippines, the Philippine Financial and Inter-Industry Pride, ensures that we are complementing what we do externally with what we do internally. We value a workplace that everyone who's part of the ADB community can thrive, and where each of us respects and embraces each other's differences. We invite each of you to come together and join us in supporting LGBT+ equality for all and building an inclusive ADB and Asian Pacific.
Hi, I'm Bruno Carrasco, Director General, concurrently Chief Compliance Officer of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department. The 2023 International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, or IDAHOTB, provides an opportunity to reflect on progress and persisting challenges in addressing the issues faced by sexual and gender minorities across Asia and the Pacific. These communities experience multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and are often excluded from legal protection. Prevalent stigma and systemic exclusion prevent these communities from participating in and enjoying the benefits of social and economic development. While ADB has long been committed to gender equality and social inclusion, its involvement in promoting the inclusion of people with diverse SOGIESC has started more recently. One of ADB's first initiatives is the Legal Barriers to Sexual and Gender Minorities Inclusion Research Project. Through this research project, ADB aims to provide comparable and quantitative data on diverse development experiences of sexual and gender minorities by highlighting correlations between their legal exclusion and economic development outcomes. The design of this study follows an earlier similar study on equality of opportunity for sexual and gender minorities by the World Bank. The research is primarily desk-based and relates to information on existing laws and regulations on social and economic inclusion. The aim is to promote legal reform, policy development, and engagement with civil society. ADB's study covers 15 developing member countries, 4 DMCs, and 2 non-DMCs. In collaboration with the World Bank, the research report is currently in its final stages, set for publication in late 2023. It will be shared through the ADB portal upon completion.
Good day, everyone. My name is Bruce Dunn, Director of Safeguards in SDCC. I'm really pleased to be able to join you here today for the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, or IDAHOTB Day. This is an important annual event to advocate for equality and non-discrimination of LGBTQI+ individuals and recognizing that all people have the right to equal respect and dignity. Now, as you may know, sexual orientation and gender identity as an issue has come up as part of the update of ADB's safeguard policy. We've received many submissions and many different perspectives, and we've been conducting broad-based stakeholder consultations, including with LGBTQI people from across the region. The consultations have highlighted anecdotes of some of the challenges that people face, and this includes barriers in accessing legal services, employment and education, healthcare, social protection and housing, as well as gender-based violence risks. However, we've also found many limitations in some of the data around LGBTQI issues in the region. And this is somewhat limiting our ability to fully quantify some of the socioeconomic impacts. This is compounded by a lack of standardized definitions, sampling bias, underreporting, and challenges in understanding some of the intersectional issues, like relationships with poverty or LGBT and people with disabilities. So this is something that we really need to work on. Now, looking ahead, we plan to continue consultations with all stakeholders and with our management and board as we develop and finalize an appropriate policy for ADB over the next 12 months. So on this IDAHOTB Day, I look forward to connecting with many of you, and thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody. My name is Albert Park. I'm the Chief Economist
and the Director General of the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department at ADB. So our department is committed to expanding the knowledge base for SOGIESC inclusion through research, collection and analysis of data, and dissemination of research findings in partnership with a larger international research community. Earlier this year, we invited Professor Lee Badgett of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, who was president-elect of the International Association for Feminist Economics and also a leading scholar on the economic benefits of LGBT inclusion, to visit ADB headquarters in Manila. And the rich discussions we had during her visit made it very plain to me that promoting greater LGBT inclusion and equality is an important development issue for the region, because exclusion on the basis of SOGIESC is very harmful to the education, mental health, and productivity of a very large number of citizens. And any form of exclusion undermines both economic efficiency and equity objectives. Unfortunately, there's still a clear lack of data and evidence to inform efforts to promote SOGIESC inclusion. So to address these gaps, our research department currently is planning 2 activities. The first is that we're working with the National Statistics Office in Nepal to conduct a nationwide sample survey on persons with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity and expression and characteristics, an activity co-financed by USAID. The survey of this scale, tailored to specific socio-cultural context, will be a first of its kind, which hopefully can be adopted later in other countries in South Asia and beyond. Second, we plan to work with the South Asia Department to study the economic cost of discrimination against people with diverse SOGIESC, drawing upon all available relevant data. Such research will complement the study of legal barriers and provide a stronger evidence base to inform ADB's approaches and actions in this space. In order to estimate the costs of exclusion, we will examine the human capital, employment, and incomes of individuals with diverse SOGIESC, disabilities, or other disadvantaged social identities. We hope that our research can contribute to creating a world that is united in diversity.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please let me congratulate today's event, Together Always, United in Diversity. ADB South Asia Department has launched our framework for integrating gender equality and social inclusion into our operations. In October last year, we organized a regional workshop with the representatives of the government, civil society organizations, and think tanks from the 6 developing member countries of the region, where the framework was discussed, adopted, and launched with their unanimous support. This framework was prepared based on our thorough assessment of the justice situation in the 6 countries. The study highlighted persistent gender inequality and its intersections with other dimensions of exclusion and vulnerability. This includes diverse sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, or SOGIESC. This intersection implies that the challenges faced by women, girls, and people with diverse SOGIESC are not homogeneous. Rather, they experience different extent and forms of disadvantage. The specific character of disadvantage they face will be critically dependent on how their lives have been intersected with different dimensions of inequality, exclusion, and vulnerability, such as age, disability, social identity like caste and ethnicity, income, geographical locations, amongst others. In order to implement the JESI framework, the JESI team in the South Asia Department are now promoting the step-by-step integration of SOGIESC-related commitments into our operations, including our country partnership strategies and programs. More specifically, we are now establishing the South Asia JESI laboratory and are now developing a range of technical assistance and grant-funded projects in Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal to start with, to support SOGIESC-related actions. The specific actions supported includes database establishment, evidence-based policy dialogues, capacity building of government agencies, and collaboration amongst the government and civil society organizations. Together, they aim to address the needs voiced by the SOGIESC community and promote their equitable access to services, resources, and benefits. Our work has just started, and we hope to do more in the coming months and years. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dear friends and colleagues both here and across the globe, today we come together to celebrate the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia, and to reaffirm our commitment to promoting diversity, equality, and the inclusion within the Asian Development Bank, or ADB, as well as in the work we do. As someone has personally both experienced and witnessed the effects of discrimination against the LGBTQI+ community, I'm proud to say that the U.S. Executive Office here at ADB has been proactively contributing to support and translate the spirit and commitments of IDAHOTB in the work of the ADB. I want to take this opportunity to share with you 3 main points that have been particularly meaningful to me in our journey towards greater inclusion. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the steps that ADB has taken towards inclusion. In October 2022, I had the privilege of witnessing firsthand the results of a consultative process which led to the finalization of the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Framework for South Asia Regional Department. It is inspiring to see how the framework identifies sexual orientation and gender identity as a systematic disadvantage and recognize the untapped potential to engage in policy dialogue and operational responses. I believe this approach can and should be replicated across all other departments. Secondly, I support including SOGIESC protection in the ADB's updated safeguards policy statement. The ADB safeguards policy has been under review, and we have been very engaged with the bank and the LGBTQI+ community. Thirdly, I want to stress the importance of connecting with the international and regional networks. Over the past year, I've had the privilege of participating in the Asia Conference of the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, ILGA, in Ho Chi Minh City in 2022, and at Sydney World Pride 2023, where I gave the keynote. Through these experiences, I've been told firsthand the challenges faced by grassroots organizations fighting for the rights of LGBTQI+ communities. In April 2023, I was heartened by the welcome provided to me and the ADB delegation at the World Bank IMF spring meetings, where ADB's efforts to walk the talk in its operational responses to SOGIESC inclusion emerged in all meetings I attended. It was a powerful reminder that our efforts are not just limited to ADB, but that we are part of a global movement towards greater inclusion and acceptance. Lastly, I want to highlight the importance of collaboration, especially with the U.S. government. The USAID LGBTQI+ coordinator understands the critical importance of collaborating with ADB and other MDBs in furthering its commitment to SOGIESC inclusion. We are committed to working together in line with the specific social-cultural context of our DMCs and in tune with the legitimate aspirations of governments, LGBTQI+, civil society, and individuals not to be left behind. I believe that working together, we can achieve great things and create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. In conclusion, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has been part of this journey towards greater inclusion. Let us continue to work together to learn from each other, to create a more just and equitable world for all. Thank you.
Good afternoon to our distinguished speakers and to those of you participating. Thank you very much once again for joining ADB's commemoration of the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. The second part of our forum will focus on the situational context and way forward to promote the inclusion of people with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, as well as sex characteristics, or SOGIESC, across Asia and the Pacific. Before we give the floor to each of our speakers, we have the privilege to have with us Honorable Jones, the 27th Undersecretary of the Air Force of the United States, to share her views on this advocacy for inclusion of people with diverse SOGIESC. I will just take a couple of minutes to introduce Honorable Jones. She is a first-generation Filipina American. Jones was appointed by President Joe Biden and unanimously confirmed by the US Senate in July of 2021. Honorable Jones is the first woman of color and the first outright lesbian to serve as the Undersecretary of Benin Military Department. Honorable Jones, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on this 18th celebration of the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. It's truly an honor for me to be here with you. I guess just mentioned, wrapped up my tenure as the 27th Undersecretary. So my comments will be in my personal capacity. But again, very much look forward to this event. And I've already been very grateful and inspired, frankly, by those that have spoken before me. Let me also just extend my thanks to the entire ADB team that has put this on. Certainly the Francesco's team, as well as in particular Ambassador Wong. She and I were speaking a couple of weeks ago, and she mentioned the opportunity to come speak to this group. So I'm really thankful, and as indicated by her remarks, her clear leadership on this issue and making sure that we are not leaving anybody behind. I'm sure you're probably asking yourselves, why do we have a former defense official here speaking to us on an ADB event? In my career in the U.S. government, I often engaged in the interagency, and we often found that defense and development at times spoke different languages. And while that might be the case, our goals are the same, and while we might use different instruments. And so I would argue the goals of ADB, prosperity, resilience, inclusion, sustainability, those are exactly the things that are necessary for national security. So these things go hand in hand. And again, very thankful. Not only do they go hand in hand, I would argue they are necessary for our national and for our economic security. So again, very privileged to spend a little bit of time talking with you about some of the things that I worked on as the Undersecretary of the Air Force. I will say though, and as many of you indicated, based on frankly the level of speakers that spoke here today, this is fundamentally a leadership issue. Right? If leaders care about this, it will trickle down through organizations, it will trickle down through governments, you'll collect the data and you'll have meaningful policies. Not only will you have that, but you will have the apparatus, you will have the backing of the organization to go check that homework and make sure things are being implemented accordingly. And fundamentally, right, it's a leadership issue, and that's really what I came to appreciate. I'm very quite thankful. Again, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, but as a member of the LGBTQ community, I must say I was very thankful when President Biden issued his memorandum very early on in his tenure that instructed each of those working in U.S. diplomatic efforts, as well as in humanitarian assistance, in foreign affairs, that they would promote and protect the human rights of LGBTQ people in their work. So again, it starts from the top down, and leaders lead. And as we think about how we do that, at least again, I might be biased from a US perspective, we have also had very clear guidance about why we need to do that. And that's been articulated well, at least for us in our 2022, the most recent national security strategy, which is not just defense, it speaks more broadly about national security. And in there, it speaks about the challenges and opportunities that we face. And it's a long document, I will sum it up, and really two statements for me that really bring it home, which is one, this is the decisive decade. This is the decisive decade. When you're thinking about climate change, when you're thinking about all the other challenges that we face individually, but also as a collective, this is a very important 10 years. All I have to do is pick up a newspaper and understand the severity of some of those, but also how exciting it is of a time when we think about those opportunities. I also always point to the last 6 words of that document, which is there is no time to waste. Right? There is no time to waste. I would also argue there is no talent to waste. When we think about, again, what we are talking about here today, when we're talking about the goals of the ADB, or whether you're talking about your individual country's goals, that all fundamentally, any strategy relies on the talent that you have to execute that. And I took that to heart as this number 2 at the Department of the Air Force. The Department of the Air Force includes 700,000 folks, both in the Air Force and in the Space Force. And the department is charged with organizing, training, and equipping. So essentially making sure the force is ready. So with that responsibility, as well as my own experience as a member of the LGBTQ community, when I served in the Air Force, I served under a policy called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I'm not sure, some of you may be familiar, and thankfully that ridiculous policy is no more, but it certainly shaped my understanding of how I would advocate for equity and inclusion in general, not only for the LGBTQ community, but in general. So I want to share a little bit about that, because again, it was so formative for me as an individual, and certainly so formative for me as a leader, as I then go on to some of the things that I push for as the undersecretary. So I will never forget, one of the very first things I had to do when I arrived at Boston University was sign a piece of paper that said, I will not engage in homosexual behavior. Because at the time, again, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the policy in effect. So I knew what that would mean for me. I knew that, if they found out I was gay, I would potentially lose my education. I'd lose the opportunity to serve my country. I'd lose the opportunity to die for my country if need be. And so again, I will never forget that. And certainly, and having served as the second highest in the Department of the Air Force, I tried to be the undersecretary that I wish I would have had when I was that young cadet and that young officer. I think what also that showed me, and then certainly I think you all, many of the comments said here today reflect the understanding of leaders taking the time and taking the steps and having the courage, the moral courage to ensure folks feel seen, they feel heard. Because it is exactly this that allows people not only to contribute to their full potential as articulated by your HR specialist, but also those are when people feel safe, when they feel seen, that is exactly, you are one step closer to achieving your goals of prosperity, resilience, inclusion, as well as sustainability. I also understood this not only in the interest of making sure we had the best and the brightest serving with us today, but also tomorrow. I think for many of you that are working in this space and development, you're not only thinking about today, you're thinking about the future. And certainly we constantly would think about the pipeline of talent, right? Not only into defense or development work, but also just public service in general. And so I think one of the reasons why this work was so important for me was to ensure that those young people looking up could also think of themselves and see themselves in an organization. And frankly, they didn't have to be LGBTQ for this to matter to them, right? They had an LGBTQ sibling, or they had an LGBTQ friend, or frankly, they just thought that everybody should be treated with dignity and respect, right? And so when young people are thinking about their careers and their futures, we've got to be cognizant of the ways in which our silence, our inaction could impact the talent that comes into our organization. Certainly that was top of mind for me as I was working in the Department of the Air Force. I will also say, and I think the Asia Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific region understands that this is a pretty tumultuous time, right? Probably understands that more than any. When you look at some of the energy challenges, frankly, when you also look at some of the challenges to sovereignty, this demands that we have the best and brightest working on these problem sets. We need their contributions. We don't need them distracted, frankly, by the threat of or the actual reality of discrimination. These problems are too big, and for us to not actively work to remove those barriers in the way, in particular for our LGBTQ community, is only doing a disservice to our own efforts to reach, frankly, the objectives of our individual organizations and our country, which is why I was ruthless about talent, and I am unapologetic about that, ruthless about talent, because as you all know in your organizations, talent can walk, talent can contribute, or talent can never join you. Right. And so when we think again about the ways in which our actions and our activities signify the value that we place or do not place on one's service, making sure that we are clear about the ways in which we are working to ensure everyone can serve to their full potential only serves to make us a stronger organization today and in the future. Unfortunately, you know, we continue to see, as articulated today, but you continue to see ways in which folks are stoking homophobia, biphobia, transphobia for unfortunately small-minded interests. And our service members, our U.S. service members, in my tenure, we're not immune to this. And so some of the things that I worked on that I think that I thought were important. Again, having had my own lived experience of serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I will tell you one of the hardest things I had to do in that seat was speak to a family that had to be relocated from one state to another because their children, two of them, at one particular location were being bullied for being members of the LGBTQ community. And again, the Department of the Air Force, DoD, is very much known for taking care of families. And we need service members focused on mission and not worried about their kids in that fashion. But I'll be honest, it was heartbreaking to hear that a service member, somebody who was courageous enough to raise their right hand and say, I will protect and defend the Constitution, that their children were being bullied. And their children, in one respect, was affecting their mental health. And so as we saw more and more of this, I wanted to be very clear about the resources in place for families that were affected, frankly, by not only the rhetoric, but increasingly the changes in local policies and frankly, state policies that were contributing to some of these things. And that is certainly not a political statement. That was a statement of fact. Right, the ways in which these laws were now affecting the conditions by which some of the dependents, the children of our service members, could access healthcare that they should be able to access. And so being clear about that, it's not a surprise that the Department of the Air Force was the first one to speak out on that, and frankly, unfortunately, was the only one. But leaders lead. And I think that's also speaks to the importance of having a diverse leadership team, diverse lived experiences that know the importance of, again, making sure that people hear you and making sure that they are aware of the resources in place to help them. I think what I also, take away from my time as the undersecretary is, for those of us that know inherently important that unfortunately the vulnerability of the LGBTQ community in certain spaces, that's not necessarily as well understood by many. And so especially when you were looking at the intersection of, for example, the LGBTQ community and then rates of sexual assault and sexual harassment, there was an overrepresentation of members of the LGBTQ community in our sexual assault, sexual harassment data. And so trying to unpack that and understand that there are some dynamics there, certainly around control and power, that again, just aren't super well understood. And so wanting to go back and, as mentioned earlier, really collect the data, make sure you have it to ensure you can do that really quality analysis to ensure then you've got good programs in place to address that. I will also say one of the things that I focused on is making sure that we had equitable access to medical services. Some of the policies, not initially by design, but in impact, affected the LGBTQ community service members' ability to access certain services, in particular reproductive health. And this was important because one of the benefits that really makes certain employers more competitive over others is the ways in which they help their employees with reproductive services, assisted reproductive services. And as people are making different life decisions about their careers and their personal families. And so leveling the playing field, ensuring there was as much equity in that access as possible was really one of the things I'm quite proud of. I will also say, going back to the point earlier about collecting the data, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed in 2011. Since then, though, there has still been the barrier to collecting some of that data, and that's based on that policy. While the policy went away, some of those kind of bureaucratic vestiges of that policy were still in effect. And so I said, look, when we are doing when we are doing our annual survey, if people feel comfortable sharing that information about their LGBTQ status, then we should collect that to see, again, if there's any intersection, if we have any heightened issues around somebody's experience as a civilian or as a military member, to understand, again, how are we treating our service members, and where might we have some challenges, some opportunities, again, to keep the best and brightest in today and ensure that we are attracting the best and brightest for tomorrow. And then, I'm not going to take responsibility for this one, but there is also it was received quite well, which is people just being able to put their pronouns in their signature block. If you're an Aaron, right, or a Blake, right, somebody with a name whose gender is not super apparent when you read it first, this made all the difference in the world for folks. So again, anything we could do to make it an inclusive workspace, we tried to do. I want to just, I'm gonna wrap up here, but those are some of the things that were specific to the LGBTQ community that I was proud to work on. But I commend each of you that are doing this work because it's hard work. Challenging assumptions, challenging biases, as mentioned earlier, looking at the intersection of these things and pushing the conversation in a way that can maybe be uncomfortable for folks, but as mentioned, is necessary if we're ever to achieve these goals of prosperity, resilience, inclusion, and sustainability. So thank you again. Let me just leave you with one last story that for me really kind of hits home for why removing these barriers is ultimately in the interest of certainly the individual country, but frankly, our national economic security. So as mentioned, in 2011, that was the 10-year repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so I asked my team at the time, I said, hey, let's see if we can find some folks in the Pentagon that served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell during the time. And let's get together in the court. It was still during COVID, so we couldn't have a big event. But I said, let's get to the courtyard. We'll take a picture. It'll be nice. And folks will share it on social media. And hopefully folks have some feeling of connection that way. So it's the day of, and I'm walking toward the group, and the group looks really young to me. And so I turned to my staff and I said, hey, are you sure these folks served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell? And my staff said, oh, actually, these folks, they wanted to be part of the picture because they came to serve because Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. Right. So when we think about removing these barriers, to me, that was just the best example of the talent that you actually invite by removing those barriers for those serving, and the message that sends to the next generation when they think about how they want us to conduct their life of public service. So thank you again for allowing me to share a little bit from my experiences as the Undersecretary. Hopefully a little bit of that resonates. Hopefully of that a little bit, it's hard work all around. I commend you. I thank you for your work. And I wish you a happy International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that most inspiring speech, Honorable Jones. Really great points you made regarding leadership, why we need to seize the moment in terms of the decisive decade that you presented, the importance of challenging the biases, and let's make sure that there's no talent that goes to waste in this endeavor, promoting the LGBTQ+ rights. Wonderful. So with that, let us now turn to the next section, which is the regional perspective. So we have a great panel with us today. I would like to ask a couple of questions to each of the panelists And may I ask that in response to the questions that you please keep your answers short and to the point so we can cover as many as we can. So I will start with a couple of questions. The first one will be on what is the general status of people with diverse SOGIESC, including the general barriers for their empowerment and inclusion in your country or in your region. And that can be followed with the second question on what are some of the more important initiatives led by your governments on advocacy and or identity-based organizations to address these barriers. So you have like a couple of minutes for each. I'm going to call on you in the order that I have here. So we'll start with Mr. Henry Ko, Executive Director for International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, ILGA Asia. Over to you, Mr. Ko.
Thank you, Bruno, and greetings to all. I'd like to just quickly share 5 points and 5 insights on the persisting trends and challenges that we are still seeing in SOGIESC based inclusions across Asia and the Pacific. Firstly, it will be on legal frameworks and discrimination. I think despite notable progress has been made throughout the world, Asia still remains at the forefront in the fight against oppressive laws on LGBTIQ people globally. In Asia alone, as many as 22 countries and territories still criminalize consensual relations of lesbian, gay, bisexual people. Over 16 countries still outlaw the gender expression of trans and non-binary people, and intersex people are still subjected to medically unnecessary surgeries and hormonal treatments. Moving on to the second point on societal stigma and violence, deeply rooted cultural and religious belief in our region, coupled with traditional gender norms, continue to contribute to discrimination and marginalization. In 2021, the UN Free and Equal campaign, for example, has reported that over 80% of transgender individuals surveyed in Asia still experience violence or harassment. Number 3, limited access to healthcare. A study by ABTN, the Asia Pacific Transgender Network, has revealed that trans individuals in Asia continue to encounter significant challenges in obtaining hormone therapy and gender-affirming surgeries. Trans people and gender non-conforming and intersex individuals in the Pacific as well, for example, confront significant barriers when seeking healthcare services that affirm their gender identities that address their unique healthcare needs. So this lack of access to inclusive and affirming healthcare further exacerbates health disparities and hinders the well-being of our gender diverse queer beings across Asia and the Pacific. Number 4, family rejections. It is no surprise that LGBTIQ individuals in Asia and the Pacific often face heart-wrenching family rejection upon coming out or expressing their authentic selves. And to us, this rejection can result in social isolation, loss of support networks, and significant mental health challenges. The absence of familial acceptance in our culture and our society not only impacts the well-being of LGBTIQ individuals, but it also hinders their ability to fully participate in their communities and contribute to society. Number 5, very quickly, on limited representation throughout politics as well as media. The lack of diverse and inclusive representation of our communities in media and politics does perpetuate harmful stereotypes and marginalization. And without diverse and inclusive representation, our voices and experiences as LGBTIQ individuals are often silenced, hindering progress towards acceptance, understanding, and equality. So it is crucial for all of us to amplify the visibility and voices of the diversity around us for 3 things: to challenge the stereotype, to foster empathy, as well as to promote social change. Thank you. Back to you, Bruno.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing those views. Much appreciated. Let's now move on to the regional perspective from South Asia. So with us today, we have Sai Subbarashi Raghavan, President of Solidarity and Action Against the HIV Infection in India, and joined by Lakshmikantan Ramakrishnan, Vice President of SATI. Maybe the same questions. What are your experiences from your region? Over to you, please.
Yeah, Bruno, I will defer this to Ramki and I will come in way forward. Ramki, to you.
Okay, thanks. Like Mr. Ko said, in India, as with other parts of Asia, Social conservatism with strongly heteropatriarchal mindsets present challenges to inclusion of people with diverse SOGIESC within natal families, society, and institutions. There is, to a degree, more acknowledgement of the existence of trans, particularly trans feminine communities, because of greater visibility and mention of Hijra persons in history, mythology, and other aspects of South Asian culture. However, cis, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, ace persons are more likely to be viewed as westernized and behaving in a way contrary to Indian culture and values. And I'm speaking primarily from the Indian context. The modern LGBTIQA+ rights movement in India is just a few decades old and began with a challenge to the colonial sodomy law, Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which was finally read down in 2018. We have also had a progressive Supreme Court verdict on trans rights in 2014, but the directives took until 2019 to translate into an act of parliament. Some of the recent initiatives. The current struggles in India include the ongoing hearings on marriage equality and for actualization of protections and inclusion in families, educational institutions, workplaces, and healthcare. Specifically for transgender persons, there are demands from the ground for horizontal reservations in education and employment to right the historical wrongs of exclusion and violence in these institutions. Some notable developments in the last 2 years have been an order from a state high court, the Madras High Court, that resulted in the National Medical Commission declaring the practice of conversion therapy to be professional misconduct practiced by doctors, and agreeing to change the medical curriculum and purge outdated and erroneous content on LGBTIQA+ issues from the medical textbooks. There has also been one High Court order from 2019 on banning genital surgeries on intersex infants with atypical genitalia, those who have no life-threatening conditions. Communities and civil society organizations are working to make this a reality countrywide. There have also been failed attempts. The National Council for Educational Research and Training, NCERT, developed a manual a couple of years ago, and some of us were involved with it, for orienting school teachers across the country on SOGIESC so they could better understand and support queer, trans, and gender non-conforming students. But this was met with a lot of criticism from several bodies, most notably the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, NCPCR. The module was promptly taken off the website and banned, and a watered-down replacement module has been developed to take its place. In terms of the way forward, regardless of the outcome of the current Supreme Court deliberations on marriage equality, we anticipate that work needs to go on to end violence from natal families and law enforcement, ensure educational institutions are free of bullying of queer, trans, and gender non-conforming children, to ensure clinically competent and respectful healthcare, including gender-affirming care, to make laws like the Domestic Violence Act and the Juvenile Justice Act LGBTIQA inclusive, and inclusion in terms of workplace protections and non-discrimination. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Shubha.
Yeah, thank you, Ramki. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to talk about the way forward. First, be more courageous and reinforce on every occasion that it is unacceptable that LGBTQI individuals do not have basic civil rights in our countries, including the right to choose their family and inherit, as well as the right to see adoption, parenting, fostering, insurance, marriage, and medical. We must not douse the anguish within us without taking the required action. When we are not angry, we often adjust and do not act. Second, when the laws failed us in our countries, such as India and Sri Lanka, we were successful in the court rulings. But however, it required more than 6 years for us to translate them into services or benefits. State governments are frequently slow in adopting these national laws and translating them into services. This is because lack of informed, sensitive, and visionary human resources, a defined roadmap and timetables and tracking mechanisms are among the obstacles. So we sincerely request ADB, like we have done for universal health access, for you to fund strategic and technical support units to assist the national and state governments, which you're already doing, in legal reforms and translating change laws into programs and services. The second is we must strengthen the civil society and government agencies' ability to budget for necessary initiatives. All of you know very well that budgeted actions only get done unmonitored. And without proper resources, and our dreams remain just dreams without wings. So we recommend that ADB also invest resources to collect disaggregated data, once again, which you started already very well, as well as assist in raising the budgets in all the relevant ministries. Fourthly, few countries, including India, have numerous social protection programs, but many of them are not accessible for LGBT communities. And we must all work together to amend these schemes to monitor their accessibility and usage. The last one, but very important, we cannot, it is not possible to reform and implement laws without changing societal norms and large number of people demanding and adopting them. We need detailed plans for bringing about change in multiple sectors such as education, medical care, legal services, and jobs, which Ramki has already said. But we also need a time-bound and concrete plan for changing societal norms. We cannot let many, many decades pass without protecting their rights. And thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, Sai Subbarashri and Ramki, for those suggestions. We take note. Moving on, from Southeast Asia, we have the senator from the Philippines, Ms. Riza Ontiveros. Unfortunately, Senator Ontiveros could not join, but she has left a recorded message, and we will play that at the end. Next, from Central Asia, we have Uruj Arshad, Senior Program Manager, Dignity for All LGBTQI+ Assistance Program at Freedom House. Uruj, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity. In my introduction, I run a global program, but in this context, I will be talking about the situation in Pakistan, which is where I was born and raised. And actually, a lot of similarities to the context that Shubha and Ramki have also shared. And I will kind of talk specifically from the context of what's going on in Pakistan, but definitely the comments resonated here as well. For Pakistan, we cannot separate LGBTQI+ rights from the broader context of minority rights and women's rights and sort of the larger civic space that has been shrinking since the foundation of Pakistan. And I certainly experienced that growing up there under a dictatorship in the 80s, and really the conflation of the nation state with religion kind of introduced very sort of draconian laws that had a really harmful impact on minorities, which we still see to this day. And recently, folks have been following the developments in Pakistan, the recent crackdowns against protesters, internet shutdown, all of that has led to further decrease in the space that civil society occupies. And so within this context, LGBTQI civil society space also continues to shrink. There's been increased legal barriers around registration of NGOs, for example, kind of deregistration of INGOs in the space, difficulty to get foreign funding in, all of the things that we also see globally is happening, within the context of Pakistan. And we also have conservative social attitudes towards LGBTQI issues, kind of similar to what my colleagues from India said. There is a very visible trans community. In Pakistan, they identify as Khwajasaras, in India, as Hijras, but that community is really visible but highly marginalized. But any space for sort of the LGB organizing is criminalized. We still have 377 as the penal code, unfortunately, very inspired by everything that's been going on in India around decriminalization, but unfortunately for us, we don't see a future, unfortunately, anytime soon where that would be decriminalization for us. So within that context, things are really difficult. But there was also from our side a very progressive transgender law that was passed in 2018, and that was a really incredible news, and also was fought by trans community, using sort of their basis of indigenous Muslim South Asian identities to fight for that law to happen. And it was, and it's still, it's still a law. Extremely progressive language in there, and really was the first time it would have allowed transgender communities to become part of the democratic process of Pakistan, to be able to do, to be able to vote, to be able to run for elections. unfortunately, though, since last year, there's been an intense backlash against the law by the religious, hardline religious community, who have mobilized millions of social media followers to attack this law, to talk about it being anti-Muslim, anti-Pakistan, pro-Western. And so we also see these kind of larger geopolitical issues play out. You know, very visible trans activists have been outed and have to flee Pakistan. And it's just a really troubling situation right now that the community is in. And so these latest developments has seriously impacted the implementation of the transgender law that was in the works by the government. You know, there was a prominent trans woman who was appointed to the Ministry of Human Rights to be able to lead the implementation of their program in conjunction with the trans community. And also what we've seen now, because there's so much backlash against the law, that especially trans men who were very much included in the conversations that led up to the passage of the law, that no longer feel part of the conversation anymore and feel extremely marginalized in the backlash. So I think, kind of echoing again comments that we heard earlier, you know, it's sort of the bifurcation of the community is, you know, we need to see sort of the larger picture of when we say LGBTQI+, you know, within the context of Pakistan, the communities that are more significantly marginalized have been traditionally and now are also in this moment. So a lot of the work that is happening now with the community is to push back on the law, to do advocacy. So basically, one of the things is the social media attacks, but the other piece is that the law is being challenged in the Shariat court. So the government is being challenged. And so that's been an ongoing court case, and that there hasn't been a decision yet, but there will be a decision most likely on May 20th. So a lot will depend on what happens with that. But while the community is kind of reeling from the backlash and organizing, you know, to support the law, you know, I would say that in Pakistan, LGBTQI+ organizing is happening. It's happening all the time. A lot of times you might see it under a transgender umbrella because, again, the LGBTQ organizing would be criminalized. But, you know, when I go to Pakistan, and I was just recently there in March, you know, communities are meeting, they're providing safe space for each other. They're doing advocacy around, especially around things like a lot of the communities facing violence, and doing stakeholder sensitizations, for example, to make the life easier for this extremely marginalized community. There's also efforts on the provincial level. So the law that I was talking about was at the federal level, but at the provincial level, especially in Sindh and Punjab, there's been some movement to make that law be implemented on the provincial level. But again, some of that work has been stalled. But in Sindh province, where the government is very supportive, you know, there was a trans pride march that happened earlier. That was really amazing, and also conversations around a provincial bill in Sindh. And there are also efforts, for example, one trans-led organization brought together 50 of their members to talk about the backlash and how it's affecting the community, because as also said earlier, mental health and well-being are incredibly important because, again, with this context that LGBTQI civil society and community are operating in, it's really important to address this issue as well. Yeah, and just in terms of the way forward, you know, I think that even within this really kind of depressing context, there's a lot of bright spots, I would say. You know, there's feminist solidarity across the spectrum of LGBTQI communities. So there are women's marches, also called Aurat marches, that happen in Pakistan that have been going on for the last several years, that despite a lot of state and backlash and even journalists, like there was the last time this past March, journalists attacked the protesters actually. But they're inclusive of trans communities, and it's really exciting to see that mobilization happening in Pakistan. You know, there's a lot of Pakistani art that is exploded on the global level that includes LGBTQI communities, led by LGBTQI communities. So despite everything, you know, there's a lot of hope, but it's really important to address the social and economic marginalization of the communities for their sustainability and survival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uruj, for sharing your experiences in Pakistan. And again, like we've seen in other jurisdictions, using the legal system to address some of the challenges facing the LGBTQ plus community and taking those reforms forward. Let me now turn to the representative from East Asia, and I'm very pleased to have with us Naosuke Fujita, who is the co-chair, co-founder of the LGBT plus Lawyers and Allies Network, LLAN, and former Goldman Sachs Managing Director and General Counsel for Japan. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Bruno. I think I would summarize Japan's status as cautious hope. As Special Advisor Mori outlined in her opening video, Japan has been striving, particularly in the recent years, to promote societal awareness. And as she also alluded, as we speak now, and as G7 opens in Hiroshima, Japan, the national bill for the first legislation that would address SOGI generally is reported to be about to be submitted to the Japanese parliament. So there is a lot of hope, but a cautious one. I would say that this trend began in 2015, and there's been lots of favorable movements since then. The most illustrative of that is the efforts by the local governments in Japan, or the provinces in Japan. There's about a little less than 2,000 of them in Japan, and it's a spread of the local government partnership system. I'm sure you may have heard of it. While it has no force of law, it is an official expression by the local government that it will respect the dignity of same-sex partners, and also requesting the local residents and businesses to provide the same respect. Originally, back in 2015, there was only 2 local governments that adopted the partnerships system. And even in 2019, there was only 11. Now it has grown to 278, covering 68.4% of Japan's population. But the challenge is it has no force of law, and therefore is also limited in their geographical reach. Corporations likewise have made good strides. Keidanren, the Japan Business Federation, which is a group of major Japanese companies in Japan, not only the employers, but also the employees have published, have done surveys, have published raising awareness reports, and have recommended their members to take action. The issue, however, is that while people are generally aware that they must take action, they don't. Those that take the actions are a very small minority compared to the whole number of corporations that we have. I would also say that in Japan, and the current momentum is strongly supported by actually court action. And you would probably have heard of the marriage equality lawsuits. These were originally initiated across Japan on Valentine's Day in 2019. It had a common strategy. It wasn't an ad hoc litigation. It was a common strategy, a coordinated strategy to establish the freedom to marry constitutionally and to establish equality constitutionally. As we stand now, in March 2021, one of the courts, Sapporo District Court, and another one, the Tokyo District Court, ruled that it was unconstitutional not to allow the full right to marry to same-sex couples. The Osaka District Court, however, ruled that it was constitutional. It did, however, recognize the rights of same-sex couples, but it said that it must defer to the parliament to design the right system to respect same-sex couple rights. We now have Nagoya, 2 other district courts in the next couple of weeks rendering the judgment. Then it will move to the higher courts and ultimately to the Supreme Court in the next 2 years. The legal cases have got a lot of media coverage, and what's more important, has promoted dialogue, open dialogue, which has not happened before. People were afraid to speak about this openly, and this has been a very major, important development in Japan. And we now come to the national legislation that Advisor Mori, it's only reported, it hasn't been submitted yet, but I think it'll be a good start. One of the challenges is to raise awareness. And if awareness is about here, we need to raise it here. And it depends on the sector of society you're talking to. Some sectors of society have high awareness as compared to others. But more importantly, once we have awareness, how do we convert that to action? I think that's going to be the big challenge for Japan going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fujita-san, for sharing the experiences in Japan. I am very conscious that we're running out of time. With your indulgence, I may be able to go an extra 5 minutes. but we still have Senator Ontiveros' video, and then we have closing remarks. So we may not be able to take any questions directly. If any of you participating have questions, please send them in. We hope that the panelists can get back to you. But to build that extra time, I would like to ask each and every one of you in 1 minute, any message that you would like to leave with our participants. 1 minute, please. And maybe I can go the reverse order. So Fujita-san, may I start with you, please?
Oh, okay. United in diversity. I think, you know, the regional collaboration that ADB has sponsored, I think is extremely important one. I'd like to explore this further because there's significant things that can be learned from each other. So let's keep the dialogue going, not just for annual events.
Keep the dialogue going. Uruj, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would say that a lot of times Pakistan is considered, you know, one of those countries where it doesn't seem possible to make investments around SOGIESC issues, diverse SOGIESC issues. And I would say that, you know, there's a lot of incredible work going on, as I just highlighted, and it's really important to support the community, especially in this moment when they're under such attack. And you know, any kind of support that I can provide to connect to the civil society there, I would be more than happy to. So thank you for the opportunity.
Many thanks for that, Uruj. I will turn to Subhashri and Ramki. Half a minute each. Thank you.
Yes. We urge the Asian Development Bank to lead in fostering collaborations among other development partners to expand interventions and also funding allocation in the region. And we would like you to use your leadership potential and convening potential to continue this dialogue and increase that funding outlay. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to just convey solidarity and support to activists fighting the good fight in other countries, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc., South Asia, as well as East and Southeast Asia. And I hope that we can actually network amongst ourselves, share strategies, and so on moving forward. And if ADB can, you know, support in this kind of networking role, it would be excellent. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Henry.
Thank you. I'd like to quickly move on to highlight why it is important to close the gap on socioeconomic disparities for our communities across Asia and the Pacific, because economic exclusion limits opportunities for the 3 E's: education, employment, and entrepreneurship. And what this means is that it is bad for business for any developing nations. And also, let's make a business case for inclusion. Many studies, like those that has been done by McKinsey and Companies India annual inclusion in the workplace reports, have shown that inclusive workforces are more likely to outperform their peers financially, and surveys do show us that inclusivity in the workplace reduces burnout and boosts job satisfaction and employee retention. So my last message in conclusion, I'd like to thank everyone, of course, our colleagues, allies, and friends who have continuously fought against stigmatization and discrimination and contributed to inclusive economic empowerment in our region. So lastly, let us stand together always, and also stay united across our diversities as we work towards our common goal of a future where all individuals, including those of us from lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, and queer communities across Asia, so that we can live with dignity, free from discrimination, and with equal opportunities for social and economic mobility. Thank you all.
Thank you, Henry. And Honorable Jones, would you have anything to say to us?
Sure, yeah, look, keep fighting and fight like hell.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. So on that note, let me thank all of you. It's been a great panel. We certainly want to be able to continue this dialogue, but I'm afraid, given time limitations, we will now turn to the video message from Senator Ontiveros, and then we will turn it over to my colleague, DG Wickling, for the closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Magandang araw, Asian Development Bank. I'm sorry I cannot be with you today, but I want to thank you for holding this conference to celebrate the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. Homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia nullify the very humanity of people. They reduce us to labels and biases, diminish our capacities and individual possibilities. The LGBTQIA+ community is close to my heart as a woman, because many women have also walked down a similar path in history of being assigned arbitrary rules that constrict our freedom. Many members of the LGBTQIA+ community have experienced violence all their lives, as many women have. Our journey is in many ways similar, and though we women have won many victories over the centuries, I am of the belief that our rights will never be completed nor secure if we do not hold space for the LGBTQIA+ community that walks down the same road of discrimination, violence, and repression based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. LGBTQIA+ exclusion and limitation of basic rights is an explicit exclusion of large groups of people from quality education and the labor force. The Philippines, as would any country, loses so much economically and socially when we fail to implement SOGIE inclusive policies. We have been paying the costs generation after generation. The Philippines has been witness to the many ways empowering women uplifts the nation. LGBTQIA+ exclusion is holding us back. The question time and again for the Philippine government is, can we dare to imagine what it would be like to embrace equality entirely? We celebrate with our Asian neighbors like Taiwan that recently legalized adoption for same-sex couples, and Thailand that seems to be on the brink of legalizing same-sex marriage. But there are still countries like the Philippines that need to pass legislation that protects the most basic rights, such as safety, quality health care, education, and livelihood. The SOGIE Equality Bill I filed aspires to safeguard the very foundations of a dignified life, making sure discrimination does not stand in the way of all that I have just mentioned. Before we can even have conversations on making space for the members of the LGBTQIA+ community in our society, we need to return to ensuring they obtain uninhibited access, like every other person, to these daily necessities for survival. The LGBTQIA+ community has been saying that the SOGIE Equality Bill that we are pushing is but practical because we all have SOGIE. The bill will fortify social protection under our laws, making it explicit and straightforward against the oppressions many are experiencing because of their SOGIE. Although the SOGIE Equality Bill has been met with much resistance, there has also been much openness. Sometimes all it takes to understand is genuine dialogue and conversation. I have been privileged to have many opportunities for these transformative meetings over the years. I find them to be some of the most fulfilling parts of my work as a senator who tries to consistently meet with our advocates and constituents. And each time we meet, there is always something to learn. I hope you take the time to have these conversations and that you never tire having them. This is the most basic way we return humanity to each other, beyond labels, beyond biases, beyond prejudice. There is real power in the movement of the LGBTQIA+ community to bridge people once more in the deeply divided society we've created. We can undo severance, heal wounds, if we remain steadfast for equality. Some of those who have rejected the passage of this bill have said that SOGIE equality is a Western concept. Our gathering today shows us that it is not. Why can it not not be the authentic spirit of the Asian community to love our fellows unconditionally, to aspire to include them in our systems and institutions fully, to progress towards complete kindness? I would argue that as a community-centered culture, SOGIE equality is in fact very, very Asian. Thank you. Maraming salamat to our friends in ADB and our friends across Asia for your continuous friendship in this issue we are so passionate about. With your partnership, we hope to see SOGIE equality institutionalized in our policies in our lifetimes. Mabuhay ang LGBTQIA+ community. Mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you. Very good afternoon to you all. It's been a fantastic event, super interesting, inspiring, motivational discussions, perspectives, and messages. Huge thanks to you all. We had distinguished speakers and representatives from governments of Japan, the Philippines, the US. We had range of advocacy and identity-based regional and national CSOs. We had ILGA, LLIN, SATE, and others. Special thanks also to ADB colleagues. Look, we had such rich and inspiring discussions. I won't even even attempt to summarize them, but just in concluding this event, I'd like just to make a couple of very brief points. One, we spoke much about knowledge today, the importance of knowledge, but we all know it's important. Knowledge is important, but not important for its own sake. It really is only important if it informs and inspires our actions and interactions, present and future. We also discussed and noted today that the pursuit for the recognition and for the inclusion of people with diverse SOGIESC is now gradually getting more and more attention from development institutions, including also RC and the Asian Development Bank. As we learned, and you may know, you have seen, we've just started only to integrate and promote the inclusion of people with diverse SOGIESC into our operations. But clearly more needs to be done. More challenges need to be overcome. And I must say, I think we look forward to working towards this end, really. And clearly coming back to the point of knowledge, our actions in future will be informed by some of our ongoing knowledge work. We learned today, our chief economist, Albert, informed us about the status of the study on legal barriers to the inclusion of people with diverse SOGIESC, and also a number of other studies going forward on the economic cost of discrimination and social inclusion. As we take these steps in what for us at ADB is a relatively new area, we look forward to working with you all and most importantly to learning from you. Clearly for us at ADB, the involvement at this year's IDAHOTB it demonstrates that we are and that we will be with you in this advocacy. And so we've learned, me and my colleagues at the ADB and other participants, we've learned a lot from you today, and we hope that you also enjoyed the discussions and gained from the exchange. Final point, we all wish everyone, especially the people with diverse SOGIESC, success, and may you be empowered. We are one with you, and or to put it in the line of the IDAHOT's theme this year, we will be together always and united in diversity. Thank you very much.